there's more interest and more opportunity for non-government customers to send payloads to the moon. At least that's what some companies are hoping for. And we're just going to have to see if the reality turns out that way. An agreement was made today between SEOPS and Intuitive Machines to send payloads to the surface of the moon in a rideshare agreement. You might know rideshare as an opportunity for lots of different smaller payloads to be sent on one rocket to low Earth orbit. That's the most common type of rideshare. You might see it with the SpaceX transporter missions, for example. But here we are talking about rideshare to the moon, to either the lunar surface or lunar orbit, or some space between the Earth and the moon. That's cislunar space. I'm the executive director of space consulting firm Astrobotic. I've actually seen a lot of interest in my clients pursuing lunar and cislunar activity. At least 4 clients in the past year or so have been interested in lunar data or cislunar data. And one client in particular wanted to know what the market would be for non-government payloads on the surface of the moon. The companies that are really studying this are the ones who are planning to send landers and rovers to the surface of the moon or have already done so. That's the Commercial Lunar Payload Services providers, CLPS. That's a NASA program where NASA is buying these missions from commercial companies to send non-human rated landers to the surface of the moon. And because there tends to be more space on these rovers than NASA buys, there is additional space that could be used for commercial, university, or non-NASA government agencies. Rideshare to the moon isn't necessarily a new thing. We've actually been hearing about it for a few years. And I will talk about the fact that the 2 missions that pursued landing and sort of landed on the surface of the moon earlier this year did have rideshare agreements and did have non-NASA payloads on board. What makes these new agreements interesting, there is now a small, tiny small growing market for companies that are interested in being that middleman, to being the manager, to find payloads that they can put on landers or rovers on the surface of the moon, or drop off on the way to the moon in GEO, that's geostationary orbit, or lunar orbit, or anywhere in between, cislunar space. Today's particular announcement piqued my interest because it involved 2 of my former coworkers, so congratulations Chad and Justin. And it also had to do with an Intuitive Machine mission that is not contracted by NASA, what might be a completely commercial Intuitive Machine mission. And I'll get to that later. Right now, I want to describe what this agreement between SEOPS, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Chad, and Intuitive Machines is for. It is a launch services agreement. So SEOPS is buying space on an Intuitive Machine mission, an Intuitive Machine lander that will happen after IM3. SEOPS isn't going to use that space itself. They are going to find users for that space, find payloads that want a rideshare to the moon or anywhere in between. They also have a space tug. So one of the disadvantages of rideshare that we've seen with LEO missions is that they all go to the same LEO orbit. It's a bus, right? But if you have a tug that can deliver you last mile service, we call it, then you can go to the actual orbit or the actual orientation that you want. This is a really cool way for Intuitive Machines not to have to focus so much on finding customers for its landers, but instead focusing on the actual transportation and delivery of those payloads safely to the surface of the moon or wherever they're going. So what we're seeing here is specialization, where a company that wants to focus purely on transportation doesn't need to be primarily focused on finding customers for its transportation. It can contract out to other companies to find those customers for it. And this is not the first time that Intuitive Machines has put together an agreement like this. Back in 2021, Spaceflight Incorporated and Intuitive Machines had an agreement for IM2, that's the second Intuitive Machines mission, delivering rideshare on their Sherpa Escape space tug called GeoPathfinder. But I don't actually know if that program went forward. I haven't heard anything about it in the past 2 years. I couldn't find any new information. The person who is leading that is currently running his own company right now. So for right now, I actually don't know if that agreement went forward, which can tell you that maybe there wasn't enough of a market for IM2. Maybe Intuitive Machines found all the customers that it needed for IM2 and didn't need that spaceflight agreement at all. Or maybe it is going forward and we just haven't heard much about it. Intuitive Machines, of course, does provide its own rideshare services. It says right there on their website, our lunar transfer orbit delivery service can accommodate up to 1,000 kilograms of payloads and deliver customers into a myriad of high energy orbits. Is there actually a market for this? Well, I think it's a very, very, very young market, and we are still trying to figure out who is the market for this. And another one of my clients had me looking into who is actually in the market for a specific kind of lunar service. But it is a big question, right? Who is in the market other than government agencies for this kind of delivery to the surface of the moon, or this is lunar space. So we know that Intuitive Machines 1, that first mission that launched in February, it landed to the surface of the moon, it fell over on its side. If you want to know more about that mission, I have a video all about it, which you can check out after this video. And that did have a variety of payload customers on it, not just NASA, not just university, but commercial companies. I'm briefly going to go over who was on IM-1. So NASA, of course, the International Lunar Observatory, the University of Colorado Boulder, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, Columbia Sportswear, they had this space blanket, which I did a video on partnerships with non-space companies and how important they are for space companies. So if you want to watch that video where I mentioned Columbia and other non-space companies that partner with space, you can check that one out after this video. Lone Star, which put together a test mission for its data center. Galactic Legacy Labs, which was a memorial. Pace Verso, or ForSpace, or NF Moon, which was an art project. Those were the payloads that were able to land on the surface of the moon. I think only the art installation was the one that was face down onto the surface, so not able to really be accessed. But of all the ones, I don't think it needed to transfer data or anything like that. Similarly, IM-2, the next mission, which is scheduled for later this year, sometime by the end of this year, it does have, of course, NASA payloads, but it also has Advocam, if I'm saying that right, Lunar Outpost, Nokia Bell Labs, MIT, and Astroforge. And there might be additional payloads that I don't know about. I know it's a full mission. And this is also the mission where Spaceflight Incorporated was doing the rideshare. And again, I don't know if there are any missions that were actually sold through that program. The third mission, IM-3, which is targeted for sometime in 2025. That one is, of course, NASA payloads, but also European Space Agency, Korean Astronomy and Space Sciences Institute, Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, Southwest Research Institute, Redwire, Lunar Outpost, and Canadasis. I'm sorry, I'm totally butchering that name. And Intuitive Machines is saying that they still have a little bit of space left on IM-3. We've been focused solely on Intuitive Machines here, but they're not the only CLIPS provider. They're not the only one who has agreements with NASA to send a lander to the surface of the moon. We had earlier this year in January, Astrobotic Peregrine Mission 1, which unfortunately did not reach the surface of the moon. It had an anomaly. It was able to get to space, but not to the moon. But it did have customers on board. It had NASA, it had the German Space Agency, the Mexican Space Agency, Carnegie Mellon, and then a whole list of companies or organizations doing memorial capsules, time capsules, plaques, that kind of thing. BIT Incorporated, DHL, that's a shipping company, Incandescence, Lunar Mission 1, Celestis, which is a memorial company, BitMEX, Elysium Space, which is also a memorial company, Pulley Space Technologies, Carnegie Mellon University, Arch Mission Foundation, and Writers on the Moon. Now, Astrobotic does have the Griffin mission, which they are planning to launch in 2025. The payloads for that mission are currently completely in flux because of the proposed cancellation of Viper by NASA. Viper was the main payload for that mission. And if you want to know more about Viper and why it should not be canceled, I have a video on that, which I highly recommend you watch because the Viper cancellation is very controversial and may be reversed. But assuming it's not reversed, NASA has the option of flying just a mass simulator, just a piece of metal or something like that, instead of putting an actual payload on board. Or the Griffin lander could have some other payload. It could be Astrobotic is actually considering putting its own stuff on board, or they could sell that space to somebody else. And so the Griffin mission right now is completely in flux, but they are looking for customers, is my point. If Viper is not going to be on there, they need something to fly on that mission. Firefly has its own mission it's hoping to launch by the end of the year, no earlier than November, and I could not find if they have any other additional payloads other than the 10 NASA payloads that are contracted to be on that mission. And then ispace has its second mission. Its first one did not succeed. Its second one, Hakuto R Mission 2, is also scheduled, what they're saying is winter of 2024. Other than NASA payloads, I could not find any information about any additional payloads other than a UNESCO payload, a memory disk containing 275 languages and other cultural artifacts. So you can see if the payload is super tiny, like a little memory disk, then it's probably inexpensive and they can probably put it on a mission even if the mission is pretty much full. What we're seeing is mixed interest. A lot of those companies were commercial companies, completely private. Most of them were non-US government agencies or universities or nonprofits or research institutes. And those tend to right now to be the primary market for these commercial landers. I'm very curious to see if SEOPS can find customers for an entirely commercial Intuitive Machines mission. So they've talked about this before, but it's sort of in vague terms. NASA has its contracts in place for its CLIPS program, but the hardware is in place so that these companies can fly their own completely commercial missions, completely independent of NASA, anytime they want, assuming they have the funding and they have the rocket. And that's what this SEOPS mission could be, is it could be a completely commercial mission that Intuitive Machines wants to put together independent of NASA CLIPS program. It's really not like the LEO market where there's a ton of customers that are interested in getting to low Earth orbit. And so you see a variety of payloads, large and small, that want to go to LEO. The moon is so completely new. It's a completely new destination, a completely new market. We really aren't going to know how this is going to turn out for a few years. So NASA is intending to put out new contracts for CLIPS. They haven't done it in a few years. They want to award 2 more task orders this year, I think they said, and 2 in 2025. So up to 4 in the next 18 months is what NASA is currently saying, which could mean 4 additional CLIPS missions being awarded to these spaceflight providers. But with those missions, with those NASA task orders, comes the ability for more rideshare opportunity. And if you want to know why these space companies really need to open up their market, their opportunities with non-space companies such as Columbia Sportswear, check this video out next.